I didn't think my life could break any further a week after burying my husband. But grief has a way of proving you wrong, over and over, until you stop expecting anything solid beneath your feet. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that hums in your ears and makes you aware of every creak, every shift of foundation, every breath you take that he no longer does. Every sound felt wrong. The kettle clicking off reminded me of the morning he collapsed in the kitchen. The old ceiling fan rattling in the living room was the same sound that filled the hospital room when the monitors finally went flat. The wind scratching at the desert shrubs outside sounded like whispers I wasn't supposed to hear. I was standing at the kitchen counter, staring at a mug of tea that had gone cold an hour ago, when my phone started buzzing across the granite countertop like it was trying to escape from something. Unknown number. Normally, I would have let it ring through to voicemail. I'd been ignoring half the world since the funeral, letting calls pile up like unpaid bills, deleting voicemails without listening. But grief does strange things to your judgment. It makes you answer calls you shouldn't and ignore the ones you should. I swiped to accept. Hello. Mrs. Hale, a woman's voice, polite, careful, with that particular cadence people use when they're speaking to the recently widowed, like I might shatter if she used the wrong tone. Is this Elena Hale? Yes, my throat still felt raw, scraped clean from days of crying, from answering the same condolence phrases, from swallowing back screams during the moments when I was alone. Who's calling? This is Marissa. I'm the assistant for attorney David Larkin, your husband's estate lawyer. I pressed my fingers to my temples, feeling the familiar pressure building behind my eyes. Ethan had handled most of the legal matters in our marriage. I'd signed where he told me to sign, trusted where he told me to trust, let him navigate the maze of paperwork that came with owning a business, a house, a life. The word estate still sounded like it belonged to someone else, someone with money and complications. Not us, not me. Is there a problem? I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. There was a pause on the other end, the kind of pause that makes your stomach drop before you even know why. Mr. Larkin asked that I schedule you in as soon as possible. He found something in your husband's files that he'd like to show you personally. The skin on the back of my neck prickled. Something in the way she said personally felt heavy, weighted with meaning I couldn't quite grasp. What sort of something? I'm not allowed to discuss details over the phone, she said, and her voice dipped lower, almost conspiratorial. But he stressed that you should come alone, and that you shouldn't mention this to anyone yet. Come alone. Don't tell anyone. Those are not words a grieving widow wants to hear from a lawyer, especially when you're still trying to figure out which bills need paying and which condolence casseroles are still safe to eat. I don't understand, I said, gripping the edge of the counter. Is this about the life insurance, the house, my? I'm so sorry, Mrs. Hale. He'll explain everything when you arrive. Papers rustled on her end, the sound of someone checking a calendar. Could you come in tomorrow morning, 10 a.m.? I looked around my kitchen like the answer might be sitting next to the sugar jar or hidden under the stack of unopened sympathy cards. The sink was full of dishes from people who dropped off food and grief and awkward hugs before fleeing back to their intact lives. On the table, my sister-in-law's half-finished latte still left a ring on the wood from this morning, a pale ghost of foam dried around the rim. Tomorrow is fine, I said, because what else could I say? 10. Thank you, the address is in his email signature, but I'll text it to you, just in case. Her voice softened in that practiced way of someone who delivers bad news professionally. Again, I'm very sorry for your loss, Mrs. Hale. She hung up before I could respond. I set the phone down slowly, the way you put down something fragile or dangerous, and stood there in my kitchen, in my house, in my life that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. Who was that? A voice called from the living room, too loud, too familiar, too present. I closed my eyes and counted to 3. Of course, I wasn't alone in my house. I hadn't been alone since the night Ethan's heart stopped beating in a hospital room that smelled like bleach and defeat. It was nothing, I said, the lie coming easier than the truth. Just a robocall. I stepped out of the kitchen and into the living room, where my brother-in-law, Cole, had taken possession of Ethan's favorite leather recliner like it came with his last name. He was sprawled across it, bare feet propped on my coffee table, scrolling through something and his phone with the kind of casual ownership that made my teeth clench. An open beer bottle sweated onto a stack of sympathy cards someone had carefully arranged, leaving dark water rings on the words, "In our thoughts and prayers." His wife, Tessa, sat on the couch with her long legs tucked under her like a teenager at a sleepover, texting furiously with both thumbs, her phone case covered in motivational quotes about living your best life. She looked up as I walked in, her expression shifting to concern so quickly it felt rehearsed. "Elena, there you are," she said, all sympathy and professionally applied lip gloss. "We were starting to worry. You've been in the kitchen for over an hour." "I was thinking," I said, which was true. I'd been thinking about how quickly my house had stopped feeling like mine. "About what?" Cole asked, not looking up from his phone. "About whether I locked the back door," I lied again. The lies were coming easier every day. "I'm fine." "We were just talking about you," Tessa said, patting the couch cushion next to her like I was a child who needed comforting. "About how overwhelming all this must be. The paperwork, the accounts, the business, everything Ethan left behind. It's a lot for one person to handle." Cole finally looked up, fixing me with that lazy grin Ethan used to joke about, the one that made him look like he was always in on a secret joke the rest of us hadn't heard yet. "We were saying it's a good thing you have us here. Family should stick together, especially now. All this legal stuff, the financial decisions you'll have to make, it's too much for someone dealing with grief." He gestured vaguely with his beer bottle, like my dead husband's entire life, the business he'd built, the savings we'd accumulated, the house we'd bought together could all be filed under stuff and decisions, and too much. "I'm managing," I said, hearing the edge in my own voice. "Of course you are," Tessa said quickly, her tone dripping with the kind of sweetness that makes your fillings ache. "You're so strong, Elena, but grief affects decision-making. I was watching a TED Talk about it just yesterday. People in your position tend to sign things they don't fully understand because they're in shock. The brain literally can't process complex information properly during traumatic periods." She said it like she was quoting scripture, like she'd just handed me profound wisdom instead of thinly veiled condescension. "Well, good thing I can still read," I replied, sharper than I'd intended. Cole's grin faded a fraction, just enough to let me see something harder underneath. "No one's saying you can't, Elena, but Ethan trusted me with a lot of things. The business accounts, his investment strategies, his plans for the future. We talked about it right before." His face rearranged itself into practiced sorrow, the expression he'd worn at the funeral while shaking hands and accepting condolences. "Right before he passed. He wanted to make sure you'd be taken care of." I hadn't been part of those conversations. Ethan had been in the hospital most of those last weeks, hooked to machines that beeped and dripped and measured the distance between alive and not. There had been moments I'd missed while sleeping in plastic chairs in the waiting room, while fighting with insurance companies on the phone, while driving home at 2 in the morning to shower and change clothes before driving back. Hours when Cole had visited alone, when they'd talked about things I wasn't present for. "Anyway," Cole continued, taking a long pull from his beer, "once the insurance clears and the executor stuff is done, we'll help you move things into more capable hands. People who know how to manage this kind of wealth properly. Ethan wouldn't want you stressed about money on top of everything else." The way he said, "capable hands," made my jaw clench so hard I thought my molars might crack. As if my hands, the ones that had held Ethan's in that hospital room, the ones that had signed our marriage license, and our mortgage papers and his medical directives, suddenly weren't capable of holding anything more complicated than tissues and tea. "My hands are perfectly capable," I said, keeping my voice level. "And this is still my house, remember. My name is on the deed." Tessa laughed lightly, the sound like wind chimes made of glass. "Of course it is. We're not trying to take over, sweetie. We're just camping out here until everything settles down. We didn't want you rattling around all alone in this big place, dealing with everything by yourself. That's what family does. They had moved into the guest suite the day after the funeral, arriving with suitcases and sympathetic expressions and promises to help with errands, paperwork, whatever I needed. At first, I'd been grateful. The silence in the house after everyone left had been unbearable, pressing against my chest like a physical weight. I'd welcomed their presence therein. Ois, their distraction from the empty space where Ethan used to be. What I'd gotten instead was Cole monopolizing Ethan's recliner, leaving beer bottles on every surface, tracking mud through the house like he owned it. Tessa using my credit card for her online shopping because it's just simpler to keep everything on one account for now. Wearing my jewelry, my scarves, my late husband's old college t-shirts like they were communal property. And both of them suddenly very interested in my finances, my accounts, my plans, my signatures. I glanced at the clock above the TV. Almost 5 in the afternoon. The light coming through the windows had that golden quality that meant the day was ending, that another day without Ethan was almost over. I have an appointment tomorrow, I said before I could stop myself. 10 a.m. Both of them froze for half a heartbeat. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but I caught it. The way Cole's thumb stopped mid-scroll. The way Tessa's perfectly groomed eyebrows lifted just a fraction. Cole recovered first, his voice casual. "Oh, doctor." "Lawyer," I said, and watched their expressions carefully. "Larkin," Cole asked, setting his beer down with deliberate care. "Is he calling you in about the will? Because I should probably come with you. Ethan discussed some things with me, provisions he wanted to make sure were clear. I can help explain what he meant." "No," I said, sharper than I intended. "It's fine, it's just routine estate stuff, paperwork, nothing complicated." "Still," he pressed, standing up from the recliner, suddenly very attentive. "You shouldn't have to handle that alone. Legal language can be tricky, especially in your state of mind. I insist on coming." I said no, Cole. Tessa exchanged a look with him across the room, quick as lightning but heavy with meaning. Something passed between them, some silent communication I couldn't quite decode. Worry, annoyance, suspicion. "Okay," Tessa said slowly, drawing the word out. "But if Larkin asks about the life insurance disbursement, just remember what we talked about. You want to make sure it's structured properly for tax purposes. Cole knows exactly how Ethan wanted it handled." I didn't remember having that conversation, but I nodded anyway just to make her go back to her phone and stop looking at me like I was a child who might wander into traffic. I went upstairs to the bedroom Ethan and I used to share and closed the door, turning the lock with a soft click that felt like the only privacy I'd had in weeks. The house vibrated with the sound of the television below, canned laughter from some sitcom, voices that didn't belong to anyone I loved. Tomorrow, I thought, sinking onto the bed that still smelled faintly of Ethan's cologne even though I'd washed the sheets twice. Tomorrow, I would find out what, exactly, my husband had left behind. And why his lawyer wanted to show it to me in secret, without Cole there, without Tessa there, without anyone who might have their own interpretation of what Ethan's intentions had been. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in the dark listening to the sounds of Cole and Tessa moving around downstairs, their voices carrying up through the vents, words I couldn't quite make out but whose tone felt wrong. Conspiratorial. Hushed. The way people talk when they're planning something they don't want overheard. At some point past midnight, I heard them climb the stairs, heard the guest room door close, heard the house settle into the kind of quiet that isn't peaceful but watchful. I stared at the ceiling and thought about the lawyer's assistant saying, "Come alone, and don't tell anyone," and wondered what kind of secrets Ethan had kept from me in the months before his heart gave out. I thought I'd known everything about him. 23 years of marriage tends to create that illusion. You think you know someone's fears, their dreams, their passwords, their preferred coffee order. You think you've mapped every corner of their interior landscape. But people are capable of building hidden rooms even in the houses you think you know by heart. And sometimes, You don't discover those rooms until after they're gone, and you're left holding keys to doors you didn't know existed. The law office of Larkin and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a glass and steel building in downtown Phoenix that pretended the desert heat didn't exist. The lobby was all cool marble and quiet efficiency, the kind of place where everyone spoke in lowered voices and wore expensive shoes that didn't make noise against the polished floors. I signed in at the security desk, got a visitor badge that clipped to my purse, and took the elevator up while watching the numbers climb and trying to control my breathing. The walls were mirrored, forcing me to see my own reflection, to notice the dark circles under my eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide, the way my clothes hung a little looser than they had a month ago, the way I looked like exactly what I was. A woman who'd spent the last weeks holding herself together with nothing but stubborn refusal to completely fall apart. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime onto a reception area decorated in shades of gray and cream, everything expensive and understated. A young woman behind a curved desk looked up as I approached. "Mrs. Hale," she asked, and I recognized Marissa's voice from the phone. "Mr. Larkin is ready for you, right this way." She led me down a hallway lined with conference rooms, all glass walls and closed blinds, past offices where I caught glimpses of people bent over documents, past a break room where someone was making coffee that smelled like it cost more per pound than my car payment. We stopped at a corner office with a brass nameplate that read David Larkin, Senior Partner. "Please go in," Marissa said, opening the door for me. "Can I get you anything, water, coffee?" "No, thank you," I said, because my stomach was already churning and I didn't trust it with anything more complicated than air. David Larkin rose from behind his desk as I entered. He was in his late 50s, trim and careful in the way successful lawyers often are, with silver at his temples and eyes that had probably seen every variation of human drama play out in this office. He offered his hand across the desk. "Elena," he said, his voice gentle but professional, "I'm very sorry about Ethan. He was a good man and a valued client for many years." "Thank you," I said automatically, because that's what you say when people offer condolences, even when you're starting to wonder if you really knew the man they're mourning. He gestured to a leather chair across from his desk. "Please sit. I know this is difficult timing, and I appreciate you coming in on such short notice." I sat, feeling the chair envelope me in expensive comfort that did nothing for the anxiety crawling up my spine. The office had floor-to-ceiling windows behind Larkin's desk, offering a view of the Phoenix skyline baking under the late morning sun. It made the room feel exposed, like we were having this conversation in a fishbowl. "Your assistant said you found something," I said, not wanting to sit through more pleasantries when my hands were already shaking. "In Ethan's files." Larkin settled back into his own chair and folded his hands on the desk, taking one of those breaths people take when they're about to deliver news you definitely don't want to hear. "Yes. As Ethan's estate attorney, I have access to all his legal files, including his personal documents, in order to properly execute the probate process. While I was reviewing them in preparation for filing, I discovered a separate folder on his secure server. One that was encrypted with a different password than his usual system. I frowned. Encrypted. Ethan wasn't particularly tech-savvy. He barely remembered his email password. "Which is exactly why this caught my attention," Larkin said. It suggested he had helped setting it up, or that whatever was in this folder was important enough for him to make the extra effort. As his attorney of record, I have the legal authority to access these files for estate purposes. When I managed to open the folder, I found a series of documents that I felt ethically obligated to show you directly, rather than simply file them away as part of the official record. The phrase, ethically obligated, made my mouth go dry. Lawyers don't use phrases like that unless something is very wrong. "What kind of documents?" I asked, though part of me already knew I didn't want the answer. Larkin turned his computer monitor slightly so we could both see the screen. Before I show you this, I want you to understand that nothing I'm about to reveal changes your legal position as Ethan's widow and primary beneficiary. The will you both signed 5 years ago is still valid and binding, but I believe you have a right to know what your husband was planning before his death, even if those plans never came to fruition. He clicked through a few folders, and then images began appearing on the screen. Photographs, not of me, not of our wedding, our trips, our life together. Photographs of Ethan with a woman I'd never seen before. They were candid shots, taken at different times and places over what looked like several months. A restaurant patio where Ethan sat across from her, leaning in like he was sharing secrets. A parking lot where his hand rested on the small of her back as they walked to his car. Outside an apartment building where they stood close enough that their shadows merged into one. In every photo, his body language was familiar in a way that made my chest tight. The same way he used to stand with me before. Before whatever had changed between us, that I'd been too busy, or too trusting, or too stupid to notice. The woman was younger than me by at least 10 years. Dark hair, professionally styled, pretty in that polished, Instagram-ready way that suggested personal trainers and expensive skincare. In one photo, she was laughing up at him with her whole face radiant, while his hand curved around her waist like it had every right to be there. I stared at the screen until the images blurred. My brain couldn't quite process what I was seeing, couldn't reconcile this version of Ethan with the man who'd squeezed my hand in that hospital bed, who'd said he loved me, who'd promised we'd get through it together. "No," I whispered, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. "That can't be right. Ethan wouldn't." "I'm afraid there's more," Larkin said quietly, and the gentleness in his voice somehow made it worse. He opened another file. Email threads, dozens of them, stretching back months. Ethan's familiar email address, the one I used to forward him grocery lists and funny memes, engaged in long conversations with someone listed as Ava R. I clicked on one thread at random, my hands shaking. "Ava, I transferred the money to your account today. Use it for the deposit. Once everything is signed, we can move you in without any interruptions. The sooner we make this transition, the better for everyone." I clicked another one. She has no idea about any of this. Cole's right, we need to keep things calm until the paperwork is done. Once the new will is executed and the title transfer goes through, everything will be clean. Just keep being patient with me. And another. "I'm so tired of pretending in my own home. I'm tired of sleeping in that bed and wishing I was somewhere else. I want to be with you, in our place, living our life. Just hold on a little longer. Soon." The words on the screen swam in front of me. I felt like I'd been dropped underwater, like I was trying to breathe through cotton, like the air in this expensive office had turned to something I couldn't process. "You're telling me," I said, each word careful and separate because if I let them run together I might start screaming, "that my husband was cheating on me." Larkin's expression softened in that professional way that probably cost extra in law school. The evidence strongly suggests he was involved with this woman for at least 6 months prior to his hospitalization. Her name is Ava Richards. She's 28 years old, works in marketing, lives in an apartment complex about 3 miles from your house. But the affair itself, while obviously painful, is not the primary legal issue here. He clicked again, pulling up a PDF document that looked official and dense with legal language. "This is a draft of a new will that Ethan asked me to prepare approximately 4 months ago. He never formally executed it, which means it has no legal standing whatsoever. But I felt you should know it existed." I scanned the document, my eyes catching on familiar terms and unfamiliar allocations. My name was there next to Ethan's, but the numbers beside it were a fraction of what I'd always been told our estate was worth. Most of the assets, including our home, were listed under Cole Hale, trustee with broad language that basically gave him control over everything. Another portion, disturbingly large, was designated for Ava Richards as personal support and residential arrangement. My stomach flipped over. "He wanted to cut me out," I said, the words emerging flat and factual. "He was going to leave." me almost nothing, and give everything to his brother to manage, and his mistress to live in. Requested this draft, Larkin clarified carefully. But he never signed it, which means it has absolutely no legal validity. The will currently on file, the one you both executed together 5 years ago, is still binding. Under that will, you are the primary beneficiary of the entire estate. The house is yours. The life insurance is yours. His business interests, his investment accounts, everything is yours. This document, he gestured at the screen, is nothing more than a failed intention. Some distant, ugly part of me felt relief that at least the law was on my side, that I wasn't actually penniless and homeless despite my dead husband's apparent intentions. The rest of me wanted to vomit into the leather wastepaper basket beside Larkin's desk. "There's one more thing," he said, and somehow his voice got even gentler, which I hadn't thought possible. "You mentioned your brother-in-law, Cole, in your reaction just now. There's a reason for that." He opened another email thread, this one between Ethan and Cole, dated from 4 months before Ethan's heart attack, back when he was still healthy, still going to work, still kissing me goodbye in the mornings like everything was normal. "Ethan, she still trusts me completely. Elena signs anything I put in front of her without reading it. Once the new will is executed and the title transfer is complete, the transition should be smooth. I'll make sure she's comfortable." Cole, exactly. We'll handle all the accounts professionally, she won't have to worry about any of it. Ava can move into the house once things settle down. Just keep Elena unaware of the specifics as long as possible. Less drama that way. "Ethan, you're absolutely sure this arrangement leaves her protected? I don't want her left homeless or struggling. She deserves security, even if the marriage isn't working anymore." "Cole, relax, brother. I'll manage everything. She'll have enough to be comfortable, just not enough to cause problems. You focus on getting through your treatment before you keel over. Leave the financial logistics to me." Keel over. He'd said keel over, like Ethan's life was an inconvenient boat that might tip at any moment. I gripped the arms of the chair hard enough that my knuckles went white. The room tilted slightly, or maybe that was just my sense of reality finally giving up and sliding sideways. "My husband and his brother," I said slowly, testing each word like it might explode, "were planning to move that woman into my house. After I signed away my rights to everything. After they convinced me it was for my own good." Larkin nodded once, gravely. "I debated extensively about how much to show you. These are painful revelations, and they serve no legal purpose since none of these plans were ever executed. But I decided that if I were in your position, I would want to know the full truth. I would want to understand what was really happening in my own life. There may be additional correspondence in these files, but what I've shown you represents the clearest picture of their intentions." Their intentions. Such a clinical phrase for betrayal, for conspiracy, for two men deciding that the woman who'd loved one of them and trusted the other could be managed and controlled and ultimately displaced in her own life. "Legally," Larkin continued, pulling up another document, "you are in an extremely strong position. That draft will is meaningless without Ethan's signature. Any title transfers that were discussed but not executed are void. The house is solely in your name, purchased before your marriage, with no joint ownership. Any accounts that are jointly held remain jointly held, which means you have full access. But I suspect your brother-in-law doesn't realize the extent of his legal powerlessness yet." I looked up sharply. "You think he assumes I'm still in the dark about all of this?" "I would stake my legal reputation on it," Larkin said. "Based on the timing of these documents and emails, they were moving very quickly in the weeks right before Ethan's sudden decline. His death interrupted their plans before they could be completed. My guess is that Cole believes you're a grieving widow who will sign whatever he puts in front of you, just like Ethan said you would. He probably thinks he's weeks away from controlling everything." The words sat between us like physical objects. I could almost see them, solid and ugly, taking up space in this carefully designed office. "You're telling me," I said, my voice steadier now, anger starting to burn through the shock, "that my husband was planning to screw me over, failed only because he died first, and his brother is now in my house, living rent-free, waiting for me to hand him the keys to my entire life. Larkin's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. In essence, yes, that is exactly what I'm telling you. I sat there for a long moment, feeling something inside me that had been numb and broken since Ethan's funeral suddenly crack open. Not grief this time, something sharper, something that felt almost like clarity. What do I do? I asked. Larkin leaned forward slightly, and for the first time since I'd walked into his office, he smiled. It was small and grim but entirely genuine. Well, Elena, that depends. Are you interested in protecting yourself, or are you interested in justice? What's the difference? I asked. Protecting yourself means securing your assets, getting Cole out of your house, and moving on with your life as quietly as possible. Justice means making sure he understands exactly what he tried to do, why it failed, and what happens to people who underestimate widows. He paused. I should mention that I'm ethically obligated to only help you with the first option. The second one is entirely up to you. I thought about Cole's feet on my coffee table, about Tessa wearing Ethan's t-shirts, about both of them talking about how I wasn't thinking clearly, how I needed their help, how family takes care of family. I thought about Ava Richards in those photographs, laughing and young, and certain she was winning something. I want both, I said. Larkin's smile widened just a fraction. I was hoping you'd say that. The drive home from Larkin's office passed in a blur of heat shimmer and strip malls, my hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough to leave marks, while my brain tried to process everything I'd just learned. Ethan's face kept appearing in my mind, overlaying itself on the photographs of him with Ava, the man I'd thought I knew flickering between the man who'd held my hand in that hospital room and the man who'd written those emails about moving his girlfriend into our house. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was directly overhead, beating down with that particular Phoenix brutality that makes everything shimmer like a mirage. Cole's truck sat at its usual careless angle, half blocking the sidewalk. Tessa's white SUV was parked crooked in front of the mailbox. My home looked like a parking lot for people who'd never learned to care about property that didn't belong to them. I sat in my car with the engine still running, letting the air conditioning blow cold against my face, watching the house through the windshield. From here, it looked normal, peaceful, the desert landscaping I'd spent years perfecting. The flagstone path Ethan and I had laid together one weekend, arguing playfully about patterns and placement. The front door I'd painted turquoise against his protests, winning that battle with kisses and stubbornness. My house, my life, my husband, all of it had been real, hadn't it? Or had I been living in a carefully constructed set while the real story happened somewhere else, in encrypted folders and secret apartments and whispered conversations I'd never been part of? The front door opened. Tessa emerged, shading her eyes against the sun, gesturing for me to come inside. I turned off the engine and gathered my purse, my phone, the folder of documents Larkin had printed for me, carefully organized and damning. Inside, the house smelled like something frying and Cole's cologne, sharp and aggressive. Music played from somewhere, a playlist I didn't recognize. My home sounded like someone else lived here. Elena, Tessa called from the kitchen. That you? I wanted to answer, no, I'm someone new, someone you didn't plan for. Instead I said, yeah, I'm home. Cole appeared in the doorway between the living room and kitchen, spatula in hand, wearing one of Ethan's aprons. The sight of it made something twist in my chest. Hey, how did the lawyer meeting go? Everything straightforward. Very straightforward, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Just estate paperwork, signatures and forms. Good, good, he said, too casually. He mentioned anything about the insurance disbursement timeline. I've been thinking we should discuss how to structure that. There are tax implications if it's not handled right. As if his name was on any of the documents, as if he had any legal claim to money that belonged entirely to me. He said it'll be a few weeks still, I lied smoothly. Processing delays. That's government bureaucracy for you, Cole said, shaking his head. Well, when it does come through, we'll sit down and map out a proper investment strategy. Ethan would want that money working for you, not just sitting in an account. Working for me, the words had a different mean. Ing now, with Larkin's emails fresh in my mind. Cole managing my money meant Cole controlling my money meant Cole making sure I stayed comfortable but not powerful. I'm tired, I said, which was true in ways that had nothing to do with the afternoon heat. I'm going upstairs. Wait, Tessa emerged from the kitchen, concern painted across her face like makeup. Did everything go okay? You seem tense. I'm fine, I said, just processing a lot of information. Her eyes sharpened slightly. What kind of information? Legal stuff, I said vaguely. Estate details, it's complicated. Maybe Cole should look at it, she suggested. He was in finance before, he understands these things. You shouldn't have to navigate it alone. I said I'm fine, Tessa. Something flickered across her face, too quick to read. Annoyance, worry, calculation. Then her expression smoothed back into sympathy. Of course, she said. You know where we are if you need anything, we're here for you. I climbed the stairs without responding, feeling their eyes follow me until I disappeared from view. In my bedroom, I locked the door and leaned against it, finally letting my hands shake without anyone watching. My laptop sat on the dresser where I'd left it this morning. I opened it and pulled up our joint bank accounts, the ones Ethan and I had shared for 23 years. The numbers looked wrong somehow, subtly different from what I remembered, but I couldn't immediately place why. Then I started looking at the transaction history, scrolling back through months of deposits and withdrawals, seeing patterns I'd never noticed before because I'd trusted Ethan to handle the finances. Regular transfers, every month for the past 8 months, labeled simply consulting services. $1,500, like clockwork, moving out of our account into one I didn't recognize. I clicked deeper, following the digital trail Ethan had left behind, probably thinking I'd never look, never question, never notice. The receiving account belonged to A. Richards. Ava, he'd been paying her monthly on top of everything else. I kept digging. Another account, one opened solely in Ethan's name 3 months before his heart attack, showed larger movements. 20,000 here, 15,000 there, all of it flowing outward to accounts I couldn't access, labeled with vague descriptions that meant nothing and everything. There were also regular smaller transfers to an account with Cole's name attached. Not huge amounts, but steady. 500 here, 1,000 there. Payments for what? For helping orchestrate this, for keeping quiet, for being the brother who'd help manage the grieving widow afterward. I opened Ethan's email on my laptop, using the password he'd carelessly left on a sticky note years ago, thinking he could trust me with everything because I'd never dream of looking where I wasn't supposed to. The inbox was mundane, work correspondence and automated bills and old jokes from college friends. But the archived folders, the ones you had to dig for, held different treasures. Subject lines that made my blood run cold: title transfer draft, power of attorney documents, property management authorization. I clicked on one from 7 weeks before Ethan collapsed. Cole's response to something Ethan had sent. Cole, we need Alina to sign the property management authorization as soon as possible. The sooner we get that filed, the cleaner everything becomes. I'll explain it to her if you want, make it sound routine. Ethan, not yet. She's already stressed about the medical bills, and pushing more paperwork at her now will make her suspicious. She's not stupid, just trusting. There's a difference. Cole, she trusts you. That's the point. Tell her it's for tax purposes, for protecting the house from potential creditors if the medical bills get out of hand. She'll sign it to protect what you built together. Then once it's recorded, we move forward with the rest. Ethan, I need you to understand something. I want her taken care of. Whatever happens between me and her, whatever changes we make, she deserves security. This isn't about leaving her with nothing. Cole, of course not. She'll be comfortable, just not in control. That's better for everyone, trust me. You focus on treatment, let me handle the business side. I found the PDF attachment Cole had referenced. Property Management Authorization, full of dense legal language that basically boiled down to Cole Hale gets complete decision-making power over the marital residence, including right to sell, lease, or transfer title. My signature line was blank at the bottom of page 3, waiting. The only reason this wasn't currently filed with the county recorder, the only reason Cole didn't already control my house, was that Ethan had died before he could manipulate me into signing it. Before he could convince me, it was for my own protection. Before he could weaponize my trust against my future. I closed the laptop and sat on the edge of my bed, the same bed where Ethan and I had slept beside each other for thousands of nights, where I'd thought we were partners, where I'd believed the story we were telling ourselves about our marriage. How many of those nights had he lain there thinking about Ava? How many mornings had he kissed me goodbye while planning my replacement? My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Priya Does, the attorney David Larkin referred you to. I have openings tomorrow at 9 a.m. or 2 p.m. if you'd like to discuss asset protection strategies. Please let me know what works for your schedule. I stared at the message. Larkin had mentioned another lawyer, one who specialized in high-conflict family situations. Someone who could help me protect what was mine, who could build walls Cole couldn't scale, who understood that sometimes family was the biggest threat you faced. I texted back, 9 a.m. tomorrow, thank you. Her response came within seconds, perfect, I'll send the address. And Alina, don't sign anything before we talk. I almost laughed. After everything I'd learned today, the last thing I'd be signing was my own destruction. Downstairs, I heard Cole's voice rumble with laughter, heard Tessa's lighter reply, heard the clink of glasses, and the familiar sounds of people making themselves at home in a space that wasn't theirs. They thought they were winning. They thought they were weeks, maybe days, away from everything falling into place according to whatever plan they'd mapped out with Ethan. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that the woman they thought they were managing had just been handed keys to every locked door in their conspiracy, and I intended to use every single one. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan in those photographs, his hand on Ava's waist, his expression soft in ways I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Had I missed the signs? Had there been moments I'd dismissed as stress or age or the natural drift of a long marriage? Or had he been that good at deception, at living two lives simultaneously, at making me believe in a fiction while building something else entirely? Around 2 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and went to my home office, the small room off the kitchen that had always been my space for paying bills and managing our household, the domestic work that was somehow both essential and invisible. I pulled out every bank statement from the past year, every credit card bill, every receipt I'd kept in the accordion file Ethan used to tease me about. The pattern, once I knew to look for it, was obvious. Expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never been to, charged on his business card. Hotel rooms in Phoenix, in our own city, when he'd told me he was at conferences in other states. Jewelry purchases from stores I'd never shopped in, gifts I'd never received. Monthly charges to an apartment complex I didn't recognize. He'd been paying her rent. Ethan had been keeping Ava in an apartment, paying for her life, probably promising her my house, my future, my place. And I'd been home, trusting, signing whatever he put in front of me, playing the role of devoted wife while he auditioned my replacement. In my email, I found messages from Cole going back months, casual check-ins that looked innocent on the surface but now felt different. How's Alina handling everything? Does she understand the medical costs? Make sure she knows we're here to help with the complicated stuff. He'd been monitoring me through Ethan, making sure I stayed compliant, manageable, unaware. I pulled out my phone and took photos of every damning document, every email, every receipt. I created a cloud folder, backed it up twice, sent copies to my personal email. Address, evidence, ammunition. Proof that I wasn't crazy, wasn't paranoid, wasn't a grieving widow making up conspiracies to cope with loss. This was real, the betrayal was real, and so was my decision to fight back. When morning light finally crept through the office windows, I heard movement upstairs. Cole and Tessa waking up, getting ready for another day of pretending they were helping while actually circling like well-dressed vultures. I made coffee, showered, dressed in clothes that made me feel competent instead of broken. At 8:30, I walked out to my car while Cole was still in the shower, and Tessa was in the kitchen scrolling through her phone. Going out, she asked, barely looking up. Errands, I said. Want company, I could use a Target run. I'm fine alone, I said, and left before she could push harder. The office of Priya Does was in a different building than Larkin's, older and more lived in, with worn carpets and walls lined with actual books instead of decorative spines. Her door had her name in simple letters, no fancy titles, no partnerships advertised. Inside, the space smelled like coffee and old paper, and something else I couldn't place. Determination, maybe, or the accumulated weight of other people's battles fought and won. Priya herself was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes that assessed me with the kind of intelligence that probably made opposing counsel nervous. She shook my hand firmly. Elena, thank you for coming. I know this is difficult timing, but I'm glad you're here. David Larkin said you specialize in complicated family situations, I said. That's a polite way of putting it, she replied with a slight smile. I specialize in protecting people from relatives who think inheritance is theft prevention. Please sit, tell me everything. So I did. Starting from the funeral, from Cole and Tessa moving in with their suitcases and sympathy, from the slow accumulation of small controls, from Larkin's phone call and the encrypted folder, from Ethan's secret life and Cole's emails and Ava's apartment. I told her about the unsigned will, the property authorization that had never been filed, the trust Ethan had tried to establish that would have left me with crumbs while his brother and his girlfriend divided the rest. Priya listened without interrupting, taking notes in precise handwriting, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. When I finished, nearly 40 minutes later, she set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. First, she said, I want you to understand that none of this is your fault. Not the affair, not the financial planning, not the fact that you trusted your husband. Trusting your spouse isn't naivety, it's how marriages are supposed to work. The betrayal is on them, not you, do you hear me? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Second, she continued, legally, you're in an extraordinarily strong position. Everything you've described, all of their plans, failed because Ethan died before executing them. That draft will is worthless. The property authorization is worthless. Any trust he was planning to establish doesn't exist. Under Arizona law and the valid will currently on file, you inherit everything as the surviving spouse. The house is solely yours. The accounts are yours. His share of any business interests is yours. You are not vulnerable legally. But emotionally, I said. Emotionally, you're dealing with layered trauma and betrayal from multiple people, which makes you vulnerable to manipulation, to guilt, to pressure. Cole will absolutely exploit that. He'll use your grief, your sense of family obligation, your natural desire to avoid conflict. He'll make you feel cruel for protecting yourself. That's what people like him do. She pulled out a legal pad and started writing. Here's what we're going to do. First, we confirm control of every account. Joint accounts get frozen with your approval only. Any accounts solely in Ethan's name that you're entitled to through probate, we flag those and secure them. We notify the life insurance company that you have sole claim, and any other inquiries should be referred to me. Second, she continued, we structure an irrevocable trust in your name. Everything goes into it, the house, the liquid assets, the insurance proceeds when they arrive, everything. You control it while you're alive with clear succession instructions for when you die. Your brother-in-law will not be in that trust. Neither will Ethan's girlfriend. You decide who benefits from your estate, and right now, I'm guessing that list is very short. I almost smiled. Very short. Third, and this is the big one, we begin formal eviction proceedings against Cole and Tessa. They're guests who have overstayed. Under Arizona law, since they have no lease, no rental agreement, no ownership stake, they're effectively trespassers you've been tolerating out of grief and politeness. We see. RVE them with a 30-day notice to vacate. If they're not out by the deadline, we file for forcible detainer and let the sheriff's department handle physical removal. The word sheriff sent a small thrill of fear through me, quickly overwhelmed by something else. Satisfaction, maybe, justice. What about Cole trying to claim Ethan promised him things? I asked. Verbal agreements, expectations, whatever he thinks he's entitled to. Legally meaningless, Priya said flatly. Promises are not contracts. Expectations are not entitlements. Arizona is not a state where you can claim someone's estate based on them saying, we should do this someday. The written will controls everything, and in that will, Cole gets nothing because Ethan never modified it to include him. Any claims he tries to make, we shut down immediately. She pulled out another document. I'm also going to recommend you change every password, every PIN, every security question for every account. Your email, your bank accounts, your phone, everything. I know that sounds paranoid, but you'd be surprised how often family members access things they shouldn't because passwords are shared or predictable. Shut down every avenue of access to your information. And Ava, I asked, the girlfriend. Priya's expression hardened slightly. Morally complicated, legally simple. She has zero claim to anything. She was never married to Ethan, never listed as a beneficiary in any executed document, never adopted or legally recognized in any way. Her relationship with him, whatever its nature, gives her no rights to his estate. If she tries to make noise, we send her a cease and desist. If she persists, we pursue harassment charges. But honestly, once she realizes there's no money coming, she'll probably disappear. She's been calling, I admitted. Blocked number, but I recognize the extension from Ethan's phone records. Don't answer, Priya said firmly. Document every call, every message, every attempt at contact, but don't engage. Engagement gives her an opening. Silence and legal walls are more effective. She stood and walked to her filing cabinet, pulling out a thick folder. This is going to be uncomfortable, Alina. Your in-laws will accuse you of cruelty, of betraying family, of dishonoring Ethan's memory. They'll weaponize your grief against you at every opportunity. They'll tell you you're not thinking clearly, that you're making decisions you'll regret, that you're becoming someone Ethan wouldn't recognize. You need to decide right now if you can handle that. If you can stand firm, while people you've known for decades tell you you're the villain in this story. I thought about Ethan's emails. She signs anything I put in front of her. I thought about Cole's feet on my coffee table, his casual assumption that my house was his to occupy, his plans to manage me into comfortable dependence. I thought about Tessa wearing my dead husband's shirts like costumes, about Ava laughing in those photographs, about all of them thinking I was too weak or too stupid or too grieving to protect myself. Yes, I said, I can handle it. Priya smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Good, because by the time we're done, they're going to wish they'd never underestimated you. Let's take your life back. 3 days later, the eviction notices arrived by courier at 10:37 in the morning. I was in my office when the doorbell rang, heard Tessa answer it, heard the exchange of signatures and polite thanks. Then silence, the kind that feels like a held breath. I walked out to find both envelopes sitting on the kitchen counter, Cole and Tessa standing on opposite sides of them like the documents might explode. Cole's hand hovered over his, not quite touching. What's this? He asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. Official notice, I said calmly. You have 30 days to find other accommodations and vacate the premises. Tessa laughed, the sound high and sharp. This is a joke, right? Some kind of grief humor. It's an eviction notice, I said. Legally served, you have 1 month. Cole tore open his envelope, his eyes scanning the official letterhead, the legal language, the signature of Priya Does, attorney at law. His face went through several colors, settling on an angry red that made his neck veins visible. "You're evicting us," his voice cracked on the last word. "Your family." "You're not my family," I said quietly. "You were Ethan's brother, and you're welcome to grieve him. But this is my house, and your guests who have overstayed their welcome by weeks." "This is insane," Tessa said, ripping open her own notice. "We left our apartment to come help you. We've been here cooking, cleaning, supporting you through the worst time of your life. And this is how you repay us. You've been here drinking my wine, using my credit card, and sleeping in my guest room while plotting how to take everything I own," I replied. "That's not support. That's recon." "Nascence." Cole's eyes narrowed. "What did Larkin tell you?" "Everything," I said. "The encrypted folder, the draft will, the property management authorization you and Ethan cooked up, all those helpful emails where you discussed managing me like I was incompetent. Everything." The color drained from his face. Those were private communications. "Between my late husband and his co-conspirator, about defrauding me," I said. "Larkin was ethically obligated to disclose them as part of the estate proceedings. And once I knew what you were planning, I hired my own attorney. One who specializes in protecting people from predatory relatives." "Predatory," Tessa's voice rose. "We were trying to help you. You're not thinking clearly, you're grieving, you're making terrible decisions." Ethan would be horrified. "Ethan was planning to move his girlfriend into this house after conning me into signing away my rights to it," I said. "I'm fairly certain his opinion on my decision-making is no longer relevant." Cole stepped closer, his size suddenly feeling threatening in my kitchen. "You don't understand what you're doing. That money, those assets, they're complicated. You need professional management, someone who knows what they're doing." Ethan knew that. That's why he talked to me about setting up proper structures. "Structures where you controlled everything and I got an allowance?" I asked. "Those structures." "For your protection," he shouted. "No," I said calmly. "For your profit, there's a difference." Tessa's eyes were filling with tears, but her voice stayed hard. "Where are we supposed to go? We don't have anywhere else. We gave up our place, our lease is gone, we did that for you." "You did that because you thought you were weeks away from living here permanently while cashing my insurance checks," I said. "And now you have 30 days to figure something else out. I suggest you start looking." "You can't do this," Cole said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I'd saved, the emails between him and Ethan, the evidence of their plans laid out in their own words. I held the screen where he could see it. "I can do this," I said. "And I am doing this. The law is on my side, the will is on my side, and every document you and Ethan created is worthless because he died before signing anything that mattered. You have no claim here, you never did." Cole's jaw clenched hard enough that I heard his teeth grind. "Ethan was my brother." "Then you should have honored him by respecting his widow instead of trying to rob her," I replied. Tessa grabbed Cole's arm. "Let's go, let's just go, we don't have to listen to this." "You have 30 days, I repeated. "After that, the sheriff handles it. Your choice how you want to handle that." They left the kitchen in a storm of muttered curses and slamming doors. I heard them upstairs, voices rising and falling, blame being distributed, panic setting in. I stood in my kitchen, in my house, and felt something like control returning to my life for the first time in weeks. My phone buzzed. A text from Priya, notices served. "Yes," I typed back. "They're not happy." "Good means you did it right. Remember, do not engage with any attempts at negotiation or guilt. Let them rage. Let them panic. Your position is solid. Stand firm." I made myself a cup of coffee, real coffee this time, not the cold, forgotten tea I'd been staring at for weeks. I sat at my kitchen table, in my house, and drank it while listening to Cole and Tessa moving around upstairs, their temporary home suddenly becoming very temporary indeed. Outside my window, the desert morning was bright and merciless and beautiful. The rest of the month was going to be hell. They would try everything: guilt and threats and tears and manipulation. They would tell me I was heartless, that family doesn't treat family this way, that Ethan would be disappointed in me. But Ethan had already been disappointed in me, disappointed enough to plan my replacement, disappointed enough to conspire with his brother about how to manage me out of my own life. His disappointment no longer had the power to shape my decisions. I had 30 days to endure, 30 days to stand firm while they raged and planned and tried to find leverage. But leverage requires you to have something the other person wants to protect, and I'd already lost the thing I'd been most afraid of losing. I'd lost my husband, my marriage, my illusion of safety. Everything after that was just details. And details could be managed, protected, locked away in trusts and legal documents that people like Cole couldn't touch no matter how much they believed in their own entitlement. The next 4 weeks unfolded like a theatrical performance where everyone knew their lines but kept improvising anyway, hoping to land on the magic words that would make me change my mind. Cole and Tessa rotated through strategies with the desperate creativity of people who could feel their plans slipping away, but couldn't quite accept it was already gone. Week 1, they tried sweetness. Tessa made elaborate breakfasts I didn't eat, left them plated and garnished on the kitchen island like magazine spreads. Cole suddenly remembered every nice thing Ethan had ever said about me, every compliment, every moment of pride, weaponizing my dead husband's love as proof that I was betraying his memory by not letting his brother steal from me. "He loved you so much," Tessa said one morning, her voice dripping with manufactured emotion. "He used to tell us all the time how lucky he was to have you, how you were his rock. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "It used to," I said, not looking up from my coffee, "before I found the photographs of him with Ava." She flinched and didn't bring it up again. Week 2, they deployed guilt with surgical precision. Cole cornered me in the hallway, his expression arranged into wounded betrayal. "I'm his only brother, Elena. Only family he had left after Mom and Dad died. And you're throwing me out of his house. How am I supposed to grieve him when his widow is treating me like a criminal?" "You are a criminal," I replied. "Conspiracy to defraud is a crime, you just didn't get far enough to prosecute." His mask slipped for just a moment, letting me see the calculation underneath. Then it snapped back into place. "I'm trying to help you, and you're so paranoid from grief you can't see it. That lawyer you hired, she's just milking you for fees, turning you against family so she can profit from your pain." "Priya's retainer was $1,500, I said. "You and Ethan were planning to take $750,000. I think I know who's milking whom." Week 3 brought threats, subtle at first and then increasingly desperate. Cole mentioned how hard it was for women living alone in big houses, how crime rates were rising, how you never knew what might happen. Tessa started leaving news articles around, stories about widows who'd been taken advantage of by unscrupulous lawyers, about estates that got tied up in litigation for years, about families torn apart by money. I documented everything, every veiled threat, every manipulation attempt, every article left conspicuously on the coffee table. I photographed them, timestamped them, sent them to Priya, who filed them away in what she called my insurance folder. "Just in case they escalate," she said. "We'll have patterns of behavior already established." Week 4, with only days left before the eviction deadline, they pivoted to desperation. Tessa caught me coming out of my office, her eyes genuinely red for the first time, her voice shaking. "Please," she said. "I grew up in foster care, Elena. I've never had stability, never had a place that felt like home. This house, these past weeks, even with everything, it's the first time I've felt safe somewhere. Don't take that away from me." For a moment, the soft part of me that still remembered liking Tessa, back when I thought she was just Cole's slightly shallow wife, that part wavered. Then I remembered the phone conversation I'd overheard, the one she didn't know. I'd recorded. If Alina signs the power of attorney, this place is ours within months. We sell, upgrade, and Ava gets the spare room until everything transitions. It's perfect. I looked at Tessa's tear-stained face and saw the performance underneath. You had a home, I said quietly, and you helped plan to take mine. That's not my problem to fix. Her expression hardened instantly, the tears drying up like they'd been turned off with a switch. You're going to regret this. Everyone will know what you did, how you treated us. You'll die alone in this house with no one who cares about you. Maybe, I said, but it'll be my house, not yours. On day 29, with one day left before the sheriff would arrive to enforce the eviction, I came home from a meeting with Priya to find the living room in chaos. Boxes everywhere, half-packed and abandoned, trash bags stuffed with belongings, furniture moved away from walls and left at odd angles. Cole and Tessa were having a screaming argument in the guest room, their voices carrying down the stairs. "This is your fault," Tessa shrieked. "You said it was handled, you said Ethan had it under control, you said she'd sign whatever we put in front of her." "She should have," Cole shouted back. "The old Alina would have, something changed, someone got in her head, turned her paranoid. Or maybe she was never as stupid as you thought." I stood in my wrecked living room and smiled. Let them tear each other apart. Let them blame each other for the failure of a plan that had required my ignorance to succeed. I was done being their mark. The next morning, Deputy Ruiz arrived exactly at 9, professional and calm in his brown uniform and reflective sunglasses. Behind him, Priya pulled up in her sensible sedan, briefcase in hand, looking like she'd done this 100 times and found it only mildly interesting. "Mrs. Hale," Ruiz said with a nod. "I'm here to enforce the eviction notice served 30 days ago. Are the parties currently on the premises?" "Yes," I said, "upstairs." He knocked on the front door, loud and official. "Mr. and Mrs. Cole Hale, this is the Maricopa County Sheriff's Department. I'm here to enforce a lawful eviction. You have 2 hours to remove personal belongings from the premises." The door opened slowly. Cole stood there, his face a map of rage and humiliation. "This is unnecessary, we're leaving." "Good," Ruiz said. "Then you won't mind me documenting your departure. 2 hours for personal items only. Furniture and anything else owned by Mrs. Alina Hale stays." "That chair was Ethan's," Cole protested, pointing at the leather recliner. "That chair was purchased with marital funds and belongs to the estate," Priya interjected smoothly. "Which means it belongs to Mrs. Hale. You're welcome to take items that are unquestionably yours, clothing, toiletries, personal electronics. Everything else stays." What followed was 2 hours of the most gratifying awkwardness I'd ever witnessed. Cole and Tessa dragging suitcases down the stairs, arms full of clothes and shoes, and all the small accumulations of their temporary occupation. Tessa trying to take a lamp I'd bought years ago, being stopped by Ruiz with a polite but firm, "That stays, ma'am." Cole glaring at me while hauling boxes to his truck, his entire body radiating humiliated fury. I sat on the front porch with Priya, drinking iced coffee, watching the show. "How do you feel?" Priya asked quietly. "Like I'm evicting cancer," I said. "Painful but necessary." At the 2-hour mark, Ruiz did a final walkthrough, checking that they'd only taken what was rightfully theirs, documenting the condition of the rooms they'd occupied. When he came back outside, he nodded to Priya. "They're clear," he said. "The residence is secured." Cole and Tessa stood by their vehicles in my driveway, everything they owned crammed into trunks and back seats, their faces masks of rage and disbelief. Cole took one step toward me, and Ruiz shifted his weight slightly, just enough to remind everyone he was still here. "This isn't over," Cole said, his voice low and mean. "Yes, it is," Priya replied before I could. "Any further contact with Mrs. Hale will be considered harassment and prosecuted accordingly. Any attempt to contest the will or make claims against the estate will be met with counterclaims for attempted fraud. Any defamation or slander will result in immediate civil action. Are we clear? Crystal, Cole spat. He got in his truck. Tessa got in her SUV. The engine started. They pulled away from my house, down my driveway, onto my street, and finally out of sight. The silence they left behind was different from the silence of grief. This silence felt clean, earned, mine. Go inside, Priya said gently. Walk through your house, feel what it's like to have your space back. I did, room by room. I walked through my home, noting what was missing, what had been damaged, what had been left behind. The guest room smelled Ike Tessa's perfume, sickly sweet and artificial. The bathroom they'd used was a mess of water stains and soap scum. Small damages, small thefts, small violations that would take time to undo. But they were gone. The people who'd planned to take everything from me, who'd thought grief would make me compliant enough to sign away my own future, who'd assumed I was too weak or too stupid or too broken to protect myself, they were gone. In my bedroom, I opened the windows, letting fresh air push out the stale accumulation of weeks. I sat on my bed, my hands folded in my lap, and let myself feel it. Not triumph, not yet. Just space, just possibility, just the beginning of something that might eventually become healing. My phone buzzed, a text from a blocked number. I heard what you did. Cole told me everything. Ethan would be ashamed of you. Ava, finally making contact, now that her meal ticket had been evicted. I didn't respond. I blocked the number, deleted the message, and set my phone aside. She was part of a story that was over now, a footnote in someone else's failed plan. The rest of the day, I cleaned, stripped the beds in the guest room and washed everything on hot, scrubbed the bathroom until it stopped smelling like strangers, opened every window in the house and let the desert air burn through, hot and purifying. When night fell, I made myself dinner for the first time in weeks. Not a casserole from a well-meaning friend, not takeout from a restaurant I didn't care about, but actual food I chose and prepared and ate at my own table in my own time. It tasted like victory. The next few weeks unfolded with a quietness I'd almost forgotten could exist. No one else's schedule to accommodate, no unwanted advice about my grief or my finances, no performance of helpfulness that was really just surveillance. Just me, alone in my house, figuring out who I was without Ethan and without the people who tried to take advantage of his absence. Priya called regularly to update me on the estate proceedings. The life insurance had paid out, deposited directly into the trust she'd established. The house was secured, red-titled with additional protections that made it nearly impossible for anyone to challenge my ownership. Business assets were being liquidated or reorganized, everything flowing into accounts only I controlled. You're in a strong financial position, she told me during one meeting. Stronger than Ethan probably realized when he died. The insurance alone is substantial, but with the business sale and investment accounts, you're looking at just over $2 million in liquid assets plus property. $2 million. Money Ethan and Cole had planned to divvy up while leaving me comfortable but controlled. Money that was now entirely mine to do with as I chose. I want to set up trust provisions, I said. Beneficiaries that reflect my actual values, not Ethan's last-minute attempt to reward his mistress. Priya smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Who did you have in mind? We spent the next hour restructuring my estate plans. The women's shelter where I'd volunteered before Ethan got sick, back when I'd had time for a life outside of our marriage. A scholarship fund for first-generation college students, especially young women studying STEM fields. My niece, who'd called me weekly since the funeral without once asking for money or offering advice I hadn't requested. The local food bank. The literacy program. People and organizations that actually helped instead of pretending to help while stealing. No family, Priya asked, noting the absence of Cole or Tessa or any of Ethan's relatives. My family is the people who showed up for me when I needed them without expecting anything in return, I said. That's a pretty short list, and Cole's not on it. Around week 8 after the eviction, I started going through Ethan's belongings, the things I'd been avoiding since his death. His clothes still hanging in the closet, his toiletries still lined up in the bathroom, his books stacked on his nightstand like he might come back and finish reading them. I packed them methodically, dividing things into donation boxes and garbage bags, and a small keep pile for items that still meant something despite everything. His favorite sweater that he'd worn on our 10th anniversary trip to Seattle. A watch his father had given him before he died. Photos from before Ava, before Cole's conspiracy, before everything had rotted from the inside. In the back of his closet, hidden behind old tax documents, I found something I hadn't been looking for. A shoebox, plain and unmarked. Inside were more printed emails, personal letters from Ava that he'd apparently kept, and a journal I didn't even know he'd been keeping. I almost didn't open it. Some part of me wanted to just throw the whole box away unopened, to refuse to know any more than I already knew. But another part, the part that had spent 8 weeks learning to face uncomfortable truths, couldn't walk away from one more piece of the puzzle. I sat on the bedroom floor and opened the journal. The first entries were from 2 years ago, mundane observations about work stress and home repairs and frustration with getting older. Then, about 18 months back, the tone shifted. I don't know when Alina and I stopped being partners and started being roommates. Was it gradual? Did I miss the moment we could have fixed it? She's perfectly pleasant, perfectly competent, perfectly there. But she doesn't see me anymore. I don't see her. We're two people sharing space, running parallel lives that never quite touch. I read that entry 3 times, feeling something crack open in my chest. He'd been unhappy. I'd been unhappy. We'd both been going through motions, pretending the marriage was fine because neither of us had the courage or the clarity to admit it wasn't. A few months later, another entry. Met someone today who actually laughed at my jokes, who looked at me like I was interesting instead of familiar. Her name is Ava. I know I shouldn't be thinking about her, but it's been so long since someone was excited to see me. The entries that followed chronicled the affair in painful detail. His guilt, his justifications, his growing certainty that he wanted out of our marriage but didn't know how to leave without destroying me. And then, the turn toward the plan. Cole suggested a solution today. If we're careful, if we structure things right, Alina can be taken care of without having to know about any of this. She'll have security, she won't be homeless, and I can finally have a chance at happiness before my heart gives out completely. He made it sound so rational, so clean. Maybe it is. Later entries showed him wrestling with the morality of what they were planning, but always coming back to the same justification. I'd be taken care of. I'd be comfortable. I'd never have to know how badly the marriage had failed. The last entry was dated 3 days before his heart attack. I'm getting cold feet. Alina deserves the truth, not this elaborate deception, but I'm too much of a coward to tell her. Cole says we're too far into the plan to back out now, that changing course will just make everything messier. Maybe he's right. Maybe this is kindness, protecting her from the ugly truth, or maybe I'm just protecting myself from having to face what I've become. I closed the journal and sat there on the floor of our bedroom, surrounded by boxes of his life, feeling a complicated grief I hadn't expected. He'd been unhappy. I'd been unhappy. We'd both been too scared or too stubborn or too invested in the appearance of our marriage to admit it was dying. But instead of having the hard conversation, instead of choosing honesty and divorce and splitting things fairly, he'd chosen deception. He'd chosen to plot with his brother about how to manage me out of my own life. He'd chosen to make me the problem too. Be solved rather than the partner who deserved truth. And that, I realized, was the unforgivable part. Not that he'd fallen out of love with me, not even that he'd had an affair, but that he'd looked at me, his wife of 23 years, and decided I was someone to be manipulated rather than respected. I put the journal in the trash bag. Some truths didn't need to be preserved. 3 months after Ethan's death, I drove to the apartment complex where Ava lived. I didn't plan to go inside, didn't plan to confront her, didn't even really know why I was there. But somehow my car had steered itself to the address I'd found in those emails, and I found myself parked across the street, looking up at a second-floor balcony where a woman I'd never met had built a life on the promise of mine. My phone rang, unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Elena, Ava's voice, tentative and smaller than I'd imagined. How did you get this number? I asked. Ethan gave it to me before in case of emergencies. A pause. I saw your car. I'm watching you from my window. I looked up. On the second-floor balcony, a figure stood partially hidden by the sliding door, phone pressed to her ear. What do you want, Avas? I wanted to tell you I'm sorry, she said. I know that doesn't mean anything now. I know you have no reason to believe me, but I need to say it anyway. Sorry for what? I asked. For sleeping with my husband, for planning to move into my house, for taking his money while I paid his medical bills. For all of it, she said, her voice breaking. For not thinking about who got hurt as long as I got what I wanted. For believing him when he said you didn't care anymore, that the marriage was already over, that I wasn't really the other woman because there was nothing left to other. Did you love him? I asked, surprising myself with the question. A long silence. I thought I did, but I think I loved the version of himself he performed for me, the attentive, romantic, available version, not the complicated, married, dying version. When he got sick, when things got real, I realized I'd fallen in love with a fantasy, and by then, we'd all hurt you for nothing. You hurt me for an apartment and a monthly stipend, I said. That's not nothing. That's exactly what you were worth to him. She flinched, visible even from across the street. You're right, I was cheap, we both were. Is there a point to this call? I asked. I wanted you to know that Cole lied to you, she said. About how much Ethan regretted what we were doing. In the hospital, before the end, he called me. He was terrified. He said he'd made a terrible mistake, that he'd let Cole convince him to do something unforgivable, that he needed to fix it before he died. My heart clenched. Why didn't he? He ran out of time, she said softly. He was going to call you, going to confess everything and beg you to forgive him. But his heart gave out before he could. He died thinking he'd destroyed the one person who'd actually loved him for who he was instead of who he was pretending to be. I sat with that for a moment. It changed nothing about the betrayal, nothing about the conspiracy, nothing about the months of lies and planning. But it added a layer of tragedy to the anger, a reminder that Ethan had been human and flawed and ultimately afraid. Thank you for telling me, I said finally. For what it's worth, Ava added. I'm moving. Getting out of Arizona, getting away from Cole and Tessa and all the mess we made. Starting over somewhere I don't have to live with what I did every time I see this apartment. Good luck, I said, and I meant it in the most neutral way possible. Not forgiveness, not friendship, just acknowledgement that she was another person damaged by the same circumstances. I hung up, started my car, and drove away from that complex, from Ava's balcony, from the last piece of Ethan's other life. I didn't look back. 6 months after Ethan's death, I started volunteering again. The women's shelter I'd worked with before called asking if I was ready to return, and I surprised myself by saying yes. Twice a week, I went downtown and helped women navigate the bureaucracy of leaving bad situations. How to open bank accounts that abusive partners couldn't access. How to read contracts and rental agreements and employment offers. How to recognize when someone was trying to take advantage of their vulnerability. I was good at it. Better than I'd been before, because now I understood from personal experience what it felt like to have people you trusted plot against you, to discover that love and family could be weapons, to realize you had to protect yourself because no one else would. One afternoon, I was helping a young woman named Maria understand her deceased partner's insurance policy when she looked up at me with terrified eyes. His brother keeps calling, she said, saying he needs to manage the money for me that I don't understand how these things work, that the family deserves a say in how it's distributed. I felt something click into place. Do you want his family involved in your finances? No, she whispered, but I don't want them angry with me either. I don't want to be the bad guy. I pulled out a business card. Priya does information printed in simple black letters. Call this attorney. Tell her Maria sent you from the shelter. She'll help you protect yourself legally so you don't have to fight alone. Maria took the card like it was precious. Did you have to do this? Protect yourself from family. Yes, I said, and I'm still here, you will be too. That night, driving home from the shelter, I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago. The one who'd stood in her kitchen with cold tea and an unknown caller, who trusted that her husband's secrets couldn't be that bad, who'd let Cole and Tessa move in because she was too broken to fight back. I thought about the woman I was becoming. Stronger, yes, but also harder, more careful, less willing to let anyone close enough to hurt me again. I wasn't sure yet if that was healing or just scar tissue. But I was alive, I was free, I was protected by laws and trusts and boundaries I'd built myself. And in my house, my name on the deed, my money in accounts only I controlled, my life finally, actually mine, I was learning to sleep through the night without dreaming about hospital rooms or encrypted folders or men who'd loved me poorly and planned to betray me completely. 1 year after Ethan's death, I held a small gathering. Not a memorial, nothing official, just a few people who'd actually shown up for me when everything fell apart. My niece, who'd driven 4 hours every other weekend just to sit with me in silence. My friend Jennifer from the shelter. Priya does, who'd become more than just my attorney. A few neighbors who'd brought food without asking intrusive questions. We sat on my back patio as the sun set over the desert, the sky turning impossible shades of orange and purple. Someone made a toast to new beginnings. Someone else told a funny story about her own recovery from loss. We laughed, carefully at first, and then more freely, the sound carrying across my yard like evidence that joy was still possible. I looked around at these people, this small chosen family, and realized I'd built something Ethan had never managed to build in all his planning and scheming. I'd built something real. Something that didn't require deception or control to hold together. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. For a moment, my stomach clenched, anticipating another message from Cole or Tessa or someone from that chapter of my life. But it was from the shelter. A woman I'd helped 3 months ago, who'd successfully divorced her abusive husband and secured her own apartment, her own accounts, her own future. Thank you for teaching me to read the contracts. Thank you for showing me it was possible to protect myself. I'm free now because you helped me be brave. I showed the message to Priya, who smiled. You know, she said, you've helped a lot of women navigate situations like yours. You've gotten good at it. Have you ever thought about doing it professionally? I'm not a lawyer, I said. No, but you're a survivor who understands the tactics, the manipulation, the way family can weaponize grief and guilt. There's a role for that, working alongside attorneys, helping clients. Understand what they're facing before the legal jargon makes it overwhelming. Victim advocate, client liaison, whatever you want to call it. I thought about it. About spending my days helping people protect themselves from the predators who wore familiar faces. About turning my worst experience into something useful, something that might prevent other women from signing away their futures because they were too trusting or too broken or too alone. I'd like that, I said. As the gathering wound down and people started leaving, offering hugs and promises to do this again soon, I stood alone in my backyard and looked at my house. The place Cole and Tessa had tried to occupy, that Ava had expected to move into, that Ethan had planned to sign away as if it were his to give. It was still mine. The windows glowed warm with light I'd turned on. The door was locked with keys only I carried. The title was protected by legal structures that couldn't be manipulated or dissolved. I'd lost my husband. I'd lost my illusions about my marriage. I'd lost my faith that family meant safety. But I'd gained something too. The knowledge that I was capable of protecting myself. The understanding that silence and compliance aren't the same as peace. The certainty that sometimes the people you need to protect yourself from most are the ones who claim they're trying to help you. Inside my house, I made myself dinner, chose what to watch on my television, sat in my chair that no one else occupied. I went to bed in my room, in my house, in my life that I'd defended inch by inch against people who thought grief made me vulnerable enough to steal from. They'd been wrong. Grief had made me vulnerable, yes, but it had also made me desperate enough to fight back, angry enough to refuse their version of kindness, strong enough to stand alone rather than be managed by people who saw me as a problem to solve instead of a person to respect. As I drifted off to sleep that night, my last thought was of Maria and the other women I'd helped, of the difference between enabling someone and empowering them, of how many people confused control for care. I'd been controlled for years, by a marriage that had died but neither of us admitted, by a husband who'd chosen deception over honesty, by relatives who'd seen opportunity in my grief. But I wasn't controlled anymore. And tomorrow, I'd help make sure one more woman could say the same thing. Justice, I'd learned, wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was just waking up in your own house, surrounded by boundaries you'd built yourself, protected by laws you'd learned to navigate, free from people who'd mistaken your kindness for weakness. Sometimes justice was simply surviving, and then helping others do the same. And that, I thought as sleep finally claimed me, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.